The envelope was a standard letter size, manila, the kind you can buy in bulk at any office supply store. Grandma had written on the front of it in her particular handwriting, the handwriting of a woman who learned to write when handwriting was still taught as a serious subject, careful and upright, with none of the slant or scrawl that crept into the penmanship of later generations. She'd written, "Bank, important. Ask Sam." I found it on a Tuesday afternoon in March, on her kitchen table, exactly where she'd left it, not accidentally, I understood when I picked it up. Nothing on Grandma's kitchen table was accidental. She'd run the table the way a ship's captain runs a bridge, with absolute intentionality about what was on it and why. She was in the next room. I could hear the television, the specific volume she kept it at since her hearing had started going, loud enough that it filled the house. I opened the envelope. Inside were 6 months of bank statements, printed from her online account at the local credit union. She'd asked me to set that up for her 2 years ago, and I'd done it, and I'd shown her how to log in and print, and she had clearly been using that skill in the weeks before this particular Tuesday. The statements were for her personal checking account, the one that received her Social Security and her small pension from 40 years working as a school administrator, the 2 streams of income that had covered her modest expenses for the decade since my grandfather died. I sat down at her kitchen table. I am, by training and by temperament, a methodical person. I work in accounting, not glamorous, not the career my family had predicted when they predicted careers for me, which they didn't bother to do because my family had largely written off the question of what I would become sometime around my 14th birthday. But I am good at it. I am very good at looking at numbers and understanding what they are saying, including when what they are saying is something nobody wanted said out loud. I looked at the statements. I looked at them for a long time. Then I went to the doorway of the living room and said, "Grandma, can you turn that down for a minute? I need to give you the shape of this family before I go further, because the bank statements don't mean the same thing without it. My name is Sam. I'm 32. I grew up in a family of 4 children, my brother Kevin, who is the oldest at 37, my sister Deb, who is 35, me in the middle at 32, and my youngest brother Marcus, who is 29. My parents are Gary and Lynette, both in their early 60s, both retired in the loose sense of having stopped going to offices while still having opinions about everyone else's life choices. For reasons I spent a long time trying to understand and have now mostly stopped trying to understand, I was the one in this family who didn't fit. Not dramatically, this is not a story of overt cruelty in childhood, of deliberate harm, of a parent who decided to make one child's life a punishment. It's quieter than that and, in its own way, harder to name. It's more the story of a family that organized itself around a certain set of values, visible success, conventional choices, the right kind of ambition, and in which one child simply kept failing to perform those values correctly, and in which that failure was addressed not with cruelty exactly but with a persistent, low-grade dismissal that accumulated, over years, into something that had the weight of cruelty even if it never had the intent. I didn't go to the right college. I transferred twice before finishing at a school nobody in my family had heard of, which they mentioned whenever colleges came up in conversation for approximately the next 8 years. I didn't have a high-status job. I was an accountant at a mid-sized firm, which was, in the vocabulary of my family, described variously as, just crunching numbers, not what we expected, and, on one occasion at a Thanksgiving dinner I remember with photographic precision, a waste of your potential, Sam, and I don't think you even know it. Worthless was not a word anyone used to my face. I want to be accurate about this. What they used instead were phrases that meant the same thing in the accumulated economy of a family, not quite living up, still figuring it out. "We worry about you, Sam," said with a particular tone that meant the worry was not compassionate but contemptuous. The word worthless was the word I learned to hear underneath all of them, the way you learn to read the weather in the tone of a thing before the thing is said. Grandma was the exception. She had always been the exception. I should tell you about Grandma precisely, because she is the center of this story in a way that matters more than the money. Dorothy Elaine Marsh, not the Dorothy from your imagination, not a soft and passive woman who sat in a chair and needed protecting. Had run the administrative office of a large public school system for 4 decades. She had, in her professional life, managed budgets, personnel disputes, union negotiations, and the particular chaos of a large institution staffed mostly by people with strong opinions. She was sharp in the way that people are sharp when they've spent 40 years having to be sharp, and she had never, not once in my life, spoken to me with anything other than the directness of someone who had decided I was worth being direct with. She was the one who came to my accounting firm's holiday party when I made junior partner, the only family member who came, driving 40 minutes each way at 78 years old because she'd said she would come and she kept her word. She was the one who called me every Sunday. Not my parents. Not Kevin or Deb or Marcus. Every Sunday, at 11 in the morning, to talk about whatever we felt like talking about, which was usually a mixture of local news, her garden, whatever I was reading, and, occasionally, her finances, which she had always managed herself with the same precision she'd brought to 4 decades of institutional budgets. Which is why the bank statements mattered as much as they did. Because the woman who had handed me that envelope was not a woman who made financial mistakes. She was not a woman who lost track of where her money went. She was a woman who had balanced her checkbook to the penny every month for 50 years, who knew exactly what her income was and exactly what her expenses were and exactly what the gap between them looked like. The statements showed a gap that didn't belong there. I spread the 6 months of statements on the kitchen table, September through February, and sat down across from Grandmother, who had turned off the television and come to sit with me with the contained composure of a woman who had already looked at these and already knew something was wrong but had needed another pair of eyes, specifically my pair, before she was willing to say so out loud. "Tell me what you see," she said. "Transfers," I said. "Regular ones." "How long have you known Kevin had access to this account?" Her jaw tightened. "He asked me 2 years ago," she said. "He said he wanted to be able to help me with things if I needed it. Pay a bill if I was sick or traveling." I said that was fine. "Okay," I said. I kept my voice level. Methodical. This is the thing about being an accountant. When numbers tell a story, you don't editorialize while you're still in the reading the numbers part. You wait until you understand the full picture before you let yourself have a reaction to it. "Tell me what your regular monthly expenses are." "Roughly." She told me. I already knew most of it, from years of Sunday calls, but I let her walk me through it. Her utility bills, her property taxes spread across the year, her grocery budget, her one indulgence which was a streaming service she used every evening without apology, her medical copays which had been increasing. I added it up. I compared it to what was going in. The gap between her income and her stated expenses should have left a modest surplus every month. Not large, but real. The kind of surplus a careful woman accumulates over years into a cushion for the unexpected. The cushion was not there. The surplus had been leaving the account in transfers of varying size, some small, 200 here, 300 there, easy to miss in isolation, and some larger, for figures, twice in the 6 months I was looking at, transferred to an account number I didn't recognize. "Have you asked Kevin about any of these?" I said. "I mentioned one of them," she said. "Last fall. He said he'd moved some money around to protect it from fees. That the credit union was going to start charging for the account and he'd found a better option." "Did he show you the better option?" "He said he'd send me a statement." "He didn't." I looked at her. I believed him, she said, and something in the way she said it made me understand that what I was seeing on her face was not embarrassment, exactly, but the specific pain of a woman who had spent 40 years being the person in the room who knew exactly what was happening and had, in the one situation where it mattered most personally, let herself be managed. "Let me take these home tonight," I said. "And I'm going to need you to give me the last 2 years of statements, not just 6 months. Can you print those?" "I already printed them," she said. She went to the cabinet beside the refrigerator, the one she'd always called the important papers cabinet, and she took out a second envelope, thicker than the first, and set it on the table. She'd been preparing for this conversation. She just needed me to start it. 2 years of bank statements take longer to analyze than 6 months. I want to be honest about the time this took, because stories about financial crimes tend to compress the investigation into a montage, and the reality is considerably less cinematic. It took me 3 evenings. I work with numbers all day, which means my relationship with them after hours is approximately the same as a chef's relationship with cooking on a Tuesday night, technically possible, but requiring a specific kind of determination to sustain. I sustained it. I made coffee and I sat at my own kitchen table and I went line by line, and what assembled itself, over 3 evenings, was the picture I'd suspected from the first hour at Grandma Dot's table but hadn't wanted to quantify until I was sure. The transfers began 26 months ago. They were not consistent in amount, they ranged from $200 to $4,800, but they were consistent in direction and consistent in frequency, averaging between 1 and 3 per month, never on a predictable schedule, which I recognized as a pattern used by people who understand that regular, identical transactions attract more attention than irregular ones. 26 months. 41 transactions. Total removed, $127,340. I wrote that number on a piece of paper and looked at it for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do that evening. I opened my laptop and I looked up Kevin's business history for the past 3 years. I am 32 years old and Kevin is 37, which means I have been watching Kevin run businesses that don't work out for approximately 15 years. Not because Kevin is stupid, he isn't, but because Kevin has always had the specific variety of confidence that is 1 degree in excess of the actual situation, and that 1 degree of excess has, reliably, been the difference between a business that might have worked and a business that fails after 18 months while owing money to several people. I had always known, in the vague way that families know these things, that Kevin had money problems. What I hadn't known was the specific shape of those problems in the 26 months that corresponded exactly to the period of the transfers. Kevin had started a 3rd business in that window. A logistics company, or something described as a logistics company, registered in the state 18 months ago. The registration was a matter of public record. So was the lien that had been filed against it 7 months ago by a supplier. So was the notice of pending dissolution filed 3 months ago. I called Grandma Dot on Saturday morning. "I need to come back," I said. "I know," she said. "Come for lunch." Over lunch, she made soup, the specific chicken soup she'd been making my whole life, which felt like both an act of love and a small act of defiance against the gravity of what we were about to talk about. I told her the full number. She heard it without flinching. This is the thing about it. She had processed the shape of this in the weeks before she'd written "Ask Sam" on that envelope, and the full number was not, I think, a surprise so much as a confirmation of the number she'd already been arriving at in her own head. "He needed money," she said. "Yes," I said. "He could have asked me." "I know. I would have helped him," she said. "I might not have had $127,000 to give him, but I would have helped him with what I could." "I know you would have," I said. She looked at the soup bowl in front of her. "He didn't ask," she said. "He just took it." The distinction between those two things, the asking versus the taking, is the one I've thought about the most in the months since this conversation. Not because the taking is worse in some legal or technical sense than the asking would have been, though it is also that. But because the decision not to ask is a decision to treat a person as a resource rather than a human being. To extract rather than request. To manage around someone's autonomy rather than trust it. Kevin had looked at his grandmother, a woman who had worked for 40 years and built a modest cushion to sustain herself through her last chapter, and he had decided she was easier to take from than to be honest with. And the only way that decision makes sense is if he had, somewhere in himself, already decided she didn't fully count. "What do you want to do?" I said. She looked up from the soup. "What are the options?" "You could do nothing," I said. "You could confront Kevin directly. You could involve a lawyer. You could involve the police. Those are the real options, and I want to name them plainly so you're deciding what you actually want, not what's easiest." She was quiet for a long time. "If I do nothing," she said, "does it stop?" "Not unless Kevin runs out of things he needs," I said. "And based on what I found, that's not imminent." "So doing nothing isn't actually doing nothing," she said. "No," I said. "It's deciding to let it continue." She nodded. Very small. The nod of a woman making a decision that was going to cost her something she couldn't get back. "Get me a lawyer," she said. "I want to tell you about finding the lawyer, because it's the part of this story that surprised me most, And I think it might be the part that's most useful to anyone watching this who finds themselves in something similar. I didn't know an elder law attorney. I called 3 firms before I found the right one, and the right one wasn't the largest firm or the most expensive firm. It was a woman named Catherine Marsh, no relation to Grandma, who ran a 2-person practice out of a converted Victorian house on the east side of town and who, when I explained the situation on the phone, said, "How soon can you come in?" We went that Friday. Grandma dressed for it the way she dressed for anything she considered serious, carefully, with the particular attention to appearance that her generation applied to occasions that mattered. Navy blazer. The pearl earrings she'd worn to my grandfather's funeral and to every significant event since. Catherine was in her mid-50s, with reading glasses on a chain and a legal pad on her desk already annotated before we sat down, suggesting she'd been thinking about this since the phone call. She asked Dot to describe the situation in her own words. She listened without interrupting. She asked 4 precise questions when Dot finished. Then she looked at the 2 envelopes of bank statements on her desk and said, "I want to be clear about what we're looking at. This isn't a gray area. What you're describing is elder financial abuse, which is a specific crime in this state with specific statutes. The question isn't whether a crime occurred. The question is what Dorothy wants to do about it, and I want to make sure she understands all the options without anyone else in the room making that decision for her." She looked at me when she said that last part. "I brought Sam because I trust Sam," Dot said. "Sam is the one who found it." "Then I'm glad you brought Sam," Catherine said. "But I want to hear from you directly what you want." "I want it stopped," Dot said. "And I want what's mine back, if that's possible." "It may be possible," Catherine said. "It will depend on whether Kevin has any assets left to recover from. That's a question we'll need to investigate. What I can tell you is that a formal legal process, civil recovery, potentially criminal referral, sends a different message than a family conversation. A family conversation allows Kevin to manage the narrative. A legal process does not." Grandma looked at her pearl earrings and her reflection in the window for a moment. Then she said, "Start the process. What I haven't told you yet is that we told no one in the family for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Sunday phone calls with my parents in which I said nothing. 3 weeks of the normal pattern of my family's communication, which mostly meant Kevin texting my mother to complain about one thing or another and Marcus sending memes to the group chat and Deb posting things about her kids and my father occasionally weighing in on something with the specific confidence of a man who was confident about things without always being right about them. 3 weeks of knowing what I knew and saying nothing. I want to be honest about what those 3 weeks were like, because they were not straightforward. There is a particular difficulty in holding information that will hurt people, not the people who deserve to be hurt by it, but the collateral people, the ones who are connected to the situation by love and proximity rather than by their own choices. My parents were going to be devastated. My mother had always had a specific, protective relationship with Kevin, the oldest, the son, the one she had always explained and defended and believed in the way some parents believe in one child with a faith that resists contrary evidence. This was going to break something in her. I thought about that every one of those 3 weeks. And then I thought about Grandma, in her kitchen, making chicken soup, and I thought about her saying he could have asked me, and I filed the concern about my mother in the part of my mind where I put things that matter but that cannot be the deciding factor. Catherine called on a Wednesday in April. Kevin had been formally notified. The recovery process had begun. He had 14 days to respond. "How do you want to handle the family?" she asked. "I'd like to tell them before Kevin does," I said. "Then I'd move quickly," she said. I called my parents that night. My mother answered. She usually did. "Sam," she said, with the particular brightness she applied to calls from me, not the warmth she reserved for Kevin, who she worried about openly and tenderly, but a more functional warmth, the warmth of being glad someone called even if you don't spend much time wondering if they will. "What's going on?" "I need to talk to both of you," I said. "Can you put me on speaker with Dad?" A pause. The particular pause of a parent who has learned, over years of parenting, that "I need to talk to both of you" means something has happened. "Gary," she called. "Come in here." My father came in. His hello had the slightly defensive quality of a man who answers phone calls braced for bad news. "I'm going to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to let me finish before either of you responds, because there's a lot of it and the pieces need to stay in the right order." "You're scaring me," my mother said. I told them. "I know," from the envelope on the kitchen table to the "Please let me finish" with the statements to the lunch with the soup to Catherine's office to the formal notification. I told them the number. I said it clearly, $127,000. I told them how long it had been happening. I told them what the accounts showed and what Kevin's business records showed and what Catherine had said about the legal framework. I told all of it in the flattest, most methodical voice I had, the accounting voice, the one I use when numbers need to speak for themselves without editorializing from me. Then I stopped talking. The silence on the phone lasted long enough that I thought, for a moment, the call had dropped. "That's not possible," my mother said. "Mom. Kevin would not do that to Dot. He adores her. He's always adored her. The bank records are." "Bank records can be wrong," she said, and her voice had shifted to something I recognized, not denial exactly, but the specific frequency of a person whose narrative about someone they love is being challenged and who is choosing the narrative. "There has to be an explanation. He must have had her permission." "She must have." "She didn't," I said. "I was sitting with her when she saw the full amount for the first time." "Mom. She didn't know." "She's 81, Sam," my mother said. "She gets confused sometimes. She might not remember giving permission." I want to tell you what I felt when she said that, because it's important to the story. I felt, simultaneously, two things that were difficult to hold at the same time. The first was a cold, clarifying anger, the anger of watching someone you love dismiss a woman you love more in order to protect a man who didn't deserve protecting. The second was something older and more tired, the recognition of a pattern so familiar it was almost comfortable, my mother choosing the version of events that required the least revision to her understanding of Kevin, regardless of what the evidence required. She had been doing this my whole life. Not with bank statements. With smaller things. With the small constant reinterpretations that added up, over years, to a family in which Kevin's failures were always someone else's fault or the market's fault or bad luck's fault, and in which my ordinariness was a moral failing I needed to account for. "She didn't give permission," I said. "I know that because I was with her when she decided to get a lawyer. 81-year-old women who are confused don't retain estate lawyers and authorize formal legal proceedings." "A lawyer," my father said. It was the first time he'd spoken. His voice was the voice of a man landing in a reality he hadn't been ready for. "Yes," I said. "Who told her to get a lawyer?" my mother said. "She asked for one," I said. "I found the attorney." "Sam," my mother's voice changed again, not softer, sharper. "You had no right to involve lawyers before talking to this family. This is a family matter." "It stopped being a family matter," I said, "when Kevin made it a legal matter." Which he did when he transferred $127,000 out of his grandmother's account over 2 years. I didn't create this situation. I found it. "You went looking for it," she said. "Grandma gave me an envelope with her bank statements in it," I said. "She wrote my name on it. She asked me to look. I looked." Silence. "Why you?" my mother said. "Why did she go to you and not to me?" And there it was. Not what happened to Dot. Not where the money went or whether Kevin would face consequences or how the recovery process would work. The thing my mother needed to know was why Dot had gone to me. I had been waiting for this question without knowing I was waiting for it. And in the moment it arrived, I understood something about the previous 10 years of being called not quite enough in every way this family had of saying it. "Because I'm the one she trusts," I said. "With the numbers. With this specific thing. I'm an accountant." She needed an accountant. It was the generous answer. It was also true. But we both knew it wasn't the whole answer, and the part we both knew wasn't the whole answer sat on the line between us for a moment like a stone someone had dropped into water. "Kevin needs to be the one to explain this," my mother said finally. "Before anyone does anything else. He needs a chance to explain. He's been notified, I said. He has 14 days to respond to Catherine. Catherine, my mother said, the name tasting like something foreign. This attorney. Yes. So it's already done, she said. You already did all of this, without talking to us first, without asking. Grandma asked, I said. She's the one who was robbed. I didn't need to ask anyone else's permission to help her. My mother hung up. Not dramatically, she just ended the call. My father said, Sam, once, quickly, in the half-second before the line went dead, and I couldn't tell if it was apology or accusation. Kevin called me 11 minutes later. I had been expecting this too. The math was simple. My mother had called him the second she hung up with me, and Kevin was always fast when there was something to manage. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 3 minutes and 40 seconds long, which I know because I timed it before deciding whether to listen to it. I listened to it once. He said, in order, that I had misread the statements, that the transfers were authorized, that Grandma had known about every single one of them, that the money had been moved to protect her assets and not to benefit himself, that he was going to explain everything to the family, and that what I had done, going to an attorney, starting a legal process, was a betrayal of this family and a direct attack on him specifically, and that this was exactly the kind of thing people who had always been jealous of him did when they got the chance. Jealous of him. I played that part back twice. I had been called worthless and not quite living up and still figuring it out, and a waste of potential for the better part of a decade. And the move Kevin made, when he found out I'd found him, was to reframe my discovery as jealousy. He had been doing what Kevin always did when the story stopped going his way. He had found the version in which I was the villain. I texted Catherine, Kevin called. Left a voicemail. He's going to say the transfers were authorized. What do we do with that? She responded within the hour, we let the record speak. Authorized transfers have documentation. I'll request it. Sit tight. I sat tight. Deb called that evening. Then Marcus. The calls were different in tone. Deb was shaken, genuinely distressed, with the quality of someone trying to understand rather than manage. Marcus was younger and more confused, asking questions without fully understanding yet what the answers would mean for the family. I answered both calls honestly, with the same flatness I'd used with my parents, repeating the same facts in the same order because facts stated consistently don't create the same openings for reinterpretation that summaries and emotional accounts do. Deb said, did he really do this? The records say he did, I said. Do you believe the records? I'm an accountant, I said. Yes. I believe the records. Marcus said, Mom is really upset. I know, I said. She keeps saying you should have come to the family first. Kevin took $127,000 from Grandma. I said. That's the thing that should have been brought to the family. Not the finding of it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. Yeah, okay. Kevin's response to Catherine's formal request arrived 8 days into the 14-day window. It was what Catherine described, with the dry precision of someone who had seen many versions of this particular document, as a good faith letter with questionable good faith. Kevin claimed, through his own attorney, he'd found one quickly, which told its own story, that all 41 transactions had been made with Dorothy Marsh's knowledge and verbal consent, that the money had been moved to a joint investment account for her benefit, and that the account would be unwound and the funds returned in 30 days if Dorothy wished. Catherine's response, show us the investment account. Kevin's attorney's response, 4 days later, the account had sustained losses due to market conditions and currently held approximately $34,000 of the original $127,340. Market conditions, I said, when Catherine read me that number. I know, she said. In 18 months. I know. What kind of investment loses $93,000 in 18 months? The kind, Catherine said, that may not have been an investment at all in any meaningful sense. Which is what I intend to find out. Grandma took this news sitting in Catherine's office, in the good chair Catherine apparently reserved for clients who needed it, wide, cushioned, the kind of chair that holds a person rather than just giving them somewhere to sit. She had her pearl earrings on again. She listened to Catherine explain the numbers and then she said, "So he spent most of it." "It appears so," Catherine said. "The recovery options are narrowed by the amount remaining, but they're not eliminated. The civil case is strong. The question of criminal referral is a separate conversation we should have when you're ready." "I'm ready now," Dot said. Catherine looked at her. "Dorothy. A criminal referral means police involvement, a potential prosecution, the possibility of Kevin facing charges. Are you prepared for what that means for the family?" "The family," Dot said, "is currently divided between the people who are upset about what Kevin did and the people who are upset that I found out about it. I don't think the family can get much more complicated than it already is." Catherine almost smiled. "Fair point," she said. "Then let's talk about what criminal referral looks like. I want to pause here and tell you about Grandma. In this period, because she is the part of this story I think about the most, even more than the money or the family fallout or the legal process. She was 81 years old and her grandson had stolen from her. Not a small amount. Not an amount that was possible to absorb with the consolation that at least it wasn't important. It was roughly a third of the financial cushion she built over a working life, the cushion that was supposed to carry her through however many years she had left, which at 81 is a number you can't help doing the math on even when you wish you weren't. She did not collapse. I want to say that simply and completely, she did not collapse. She was not the fragile elderly woman that some people, including, I suspect, Kevin, had decided she was. She sat in Catherine's office and she made decisions and she answered questions and she drove herself home afterward and made soup and called me Sunday at 11 as she always had. But I also want to be honest about what I saw in her that I hadn't fully seen before. A specific tiredness that had nothing to do with physical fatigue. The tiredness of a woman who had spent her whole life being competent and organized and precise and had found, at 81, that being all of those things was not sufficient protection against someone who loved her deciding she was easier to take from than to be honest with. "Do you want to talk about Kevin?" I asked, on one of those Sundays. "Not today," she said. "Tell me what you're reading." I told her what I was reading. We talked for 40 minutes about a book neither of us had finished yet. And at the end of the call, before she hung up, she said, "Thank you for finding it, Sam." "You're the one who wrote my name on the envelope," I said. "I knew you'd look at the numbers honestly," she said. "Some people in this family, they look at things the way they want them to be. You look at them the way they are." I didn't say anything for a moment. "That used to bother me about you," she said. "When you were young. You were always so literal. So precise. I thought it might make your life harder." "It did, a little," I said. "It also made you the one I could trust with this," she said. "I hope you know that the same quality that made you seem difficult in a family like ours was the quality that got me my money back. Not the full amount. But we were going to try." My parents' response in the weeks after Kevin's attorney's letter arrived went through a sequence I had partially predicted and partially hadn't. My mother moved through denial and landed, eventually, in a position I can only describe as prosecutorial, not toward Kevin, but toward the situation. She began treating the legal process as an adversarial proceeding in which the family's reputation was at stake, the primary threat being not the $127,000 but the possibility of it becoming known outside the family. She called me twice asking if there was any way to handle this quietly. I said I didn't know and that it wasn't my decision to make. She said she hoped I understood that whatever happened was going to affect all of us, not just Kevin. I said I understood that. I also said that Grandma understood it, and that she'd made her decision with that knowledge, and that it wasn't my place to override it. My mother stopped calling me after that conversation. Not permanently, we're not estranged, and I don't think we will be, though the relationship has a different shape now than it had before. But the calls stopped for about 6 weeks, which was long enough to feel significant. My father called once in that period. He asked how Dat was doing. I told him she was managing. He said, "I owe her an apology. And I owe you one too, if I'm honest." "For what?" I said. "For not looking harder," he said. At what was going on with her finances. And at other things. Over the years. He was quiet for a moment. You've always been more capable than we gave you credit for, Sam. I think we just didn't always know how to see it. I didn't know what to do with that sentence in the moment, so I put it somewhere safe and thanked him and said I'd talk to him soon. Deb had moved firmly to my side of the line. She'd called me twice since the initial conversation, once to apologize for all the years of not really seeing what was happening with Kevin, which was a more honest conversation than I'd expected from her, and once just to check in. Marcus was still processing, which was fair. He was 29 and he'd idolized Kevin his whole life, and that kind of revision takes time. Kevin had not contacted me again. The civil recovery process settled 8 months after Catherine filed the initial papers. Kevin did not have the full amount. This is the reality of these situations that doesn't get talked about clearly enough. When someone takes money and spends it, the money is often not recoverable in full, regardless of how airtight the legal case is, because you cannot recover funds that no longer exist in recoverable form. What Kevin had left, when everything was accounted for, the investment account residue, some personal assets that Catherine had located through the discovery process, a structured settlement arrangement, amounted to $71,000 returned to Grandma. Over a payment plan that will run for the next several years. Not the full amount. 71 of 127. Grandma. Accepted this settlement. She accepted it the way she accepted most things that weren't the outcome she wanted but were the realistic outcome available, without drama, with the specific pragmatism of someone who spent 40 years making decisions under constraint and understood the difference between the ideal and the achievable. Is it enough? I asked her, when Catherine explained the terms. It's more than nothing, said. And it's more than he thought I'd ever see again. The criminal referral was ultimately not pursued. This was Dot's decision. Catherine laid out the options and the realistic likelihood of different outcomes, and Dot decided that the civil process, the formal legal record, and the financial recovery were sufficient. She said she was 81 years old and she didn't want to spend the years she had on criminal proceedings. She said it with no bitterness. She said it as a statement of fact about the allocation of her remaining time, which she intended to spend on things that were not Kevin. Kevin is not in contact with Grandma. That is her decision, clearly stated, not subject to negotiation. He sent a letter, not to her directly but through his attorney, which said something about the mode of delivery, that expressed regret in the language of someone who has been coached by both a lawyer and, I suspected, my mother, to express regret without quite admitting wrongdoing. Dot read it once and put it in the recycling. He is in contact with my parents, who have, this is the part I've made my peace with, or am making my peace with, found their way to a version of events in which Kevin made serious mistakes under serious financial pressure and has suffered serious consequences, and in which the family should, over time, find a way to hold together. My mother has been carefully tactful about not asking me to participate in that version of events. I have been carefully honest about not being willing to. I see my parents at holidays. It's different than it was. Most things are. I want to talk about something that happened outside the legal process, because it's the part of this story that I think matters most for anyone watching this who has spent years being the one in the family that doesn't quite fit. 3 weeks after the settlement, Grandma. Asked me to help her set up a new financial arrangement. A new account, in her name only, with specific rules around access. We spent a Saturday afternoon doing it, at her kitchen table, the same table where she'd handed me the first envelope, the same ivory tablecloth that wasn't quite her style but that she'd kept because it was mine. While we were working through the paperwork, she said, I want to ask you something. Okay, I said. Do they know? She said. Your parents. Do they know what they did? With the worthless business. I looked at her. You knew about that. I've always known about that, she said. I didn't say anything because you didn't ask me to, and I thought you might need to work it out yourself. But I've always known. She looked at the paperwork in front of us. I want to know if they understand what they had this whole time and didn't see. Dad said something, I said. Mom, I think she knows something shifted. I don't know if she knows what it was. I'm going to tell her, said. I looked at her. Not an argument, she said. Just a fact. That the grandchild she always overlooked was the one who found her money and got some of it back and did it without flinching. I think she should know that. I think it should be on the record. You don't have to do that, I said. I know, she said. I want to. Grandma is 82 now. She drives herself to the grocery store and keeps her hedges trimmed and watches her streaming service every evening without apology and calls me on Sundays at 11. The $71,000 has started coming in, quarterly, and she mentions it the way she mentions the weather, as a fact, noted without drama, present in the picture. She has not mentioned Kevin in a Sunday call since the settlement. I don't think she will. She has made her decision about the allocation of her remaining time, and it is toward the things and people that sustain her. I am, apparently, one of those things. I am also, for the first time in my adult life, not the one in this family who doesn't quite fit. I am the one who looked at the numbers the way they were instead of the way someone wanted them to be, who helped an 82-year-old woman get back some portion of what was taken from her, who did not flinch when flinching would have been easier. I don't need the word worthless to be formally retracted. I don't need a ceremony. I just need to know what I know, which is that the same precise, literal, number-trusting quality that made me a poor fit for a family that valued a different kind of performance turned out to be exactly the quality the situation required. The envelope said "Ask Sam." She knew. If you've ever been the one in your family who was written off, overlooked, not quite seen, I hope this story gave you something. The thing I've learned is that being underestimated is not the same as being wrong. Sometimes the person the family doesn't fully believe in is the one with the clearest view of the room. Sometimes the one who doesn't fit is the only one looking at the thing directly. I'd love to know, was there ever a moment when you proved something, to your family, or to yourself, that you'd been told you couldn't do? Tell me in the comments. I read everything. Subscribe if you're here. There's another one coming, and I'll still be here when it does. Thank you for listening.